Hi, everyone. My name is Tanisha Thomas, and I'm a newsletter writer for Spotlight PA. For those of you who are new to our programming, Spotlight PA is an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit newsroom producing investigative and public service journalism about state government and urgent statewide issues. We can't do any of this work without you, our members, and those of you who support our efforts. You can learn more about us on our website, spotlightpa.org. That's spotlightpa.org. And a few housekeeping items. Tonight's event will be recorded and posted on our website tomorrow for those who couldn't be here tonight. And thank you to everyone who submitted a question in advance. If you'd like to submit a question during the event, you can do so in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. If you're unable to find that, you can also feel free to put your questions in the chat as well for me to ask them. And we'll be sure to get to those questions towards the end of our program. Tonight, we will be learning about Pennsylvania's Black Wall Street. It was a thriving block of Black services and communities between Harrisburg's North and Forster Streets in the early 20th century. The area existed until the mid 1900s and was replaced with what is now the Capitol Complex and other urban developments. There are still Black-owned businesses around, but they are more scattered. So now we'll meet our panelists. Why don't you go first with introducing yourself? We'll do Sharia. Go ahead and start out.
Good evening, and I'm excited to be here and on this panel with everyone here to talk about our Black Wall Street in this area. I am founding president and executive artistic director of Sankofa African American Theater Company, and we exist to tell the stories of our community, of our culture, and our experience.
Demetra, you can go next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Demetra Diggs. I'm a creative entrepreneur. I call myself the corporate creative, and I'm the founder of the Urban Stop brand. I have had a business on 3rd Street, which we've always affectionately called Black Wall Street. And so I'm excited to hear about the history and just to share my experience in that space.
And you can go next, Jabari.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jabari Jones. I'm a Philadelphia guy. I'm the president of an organization called the West Philadelphia Corridor Collaborative, which is a business improvement agency that represents the western part of Philadelphia. Happy to be here.
So, and then I also wanted to make note, we did have Caleb Jackson Jr., who is a resident historian of historic Harrisburg. He was scheduled to talk tonight, but due to unforeseen circumstances, he will be unable to make it. But we will go ahead and get right into the questions. Sharia, I'm going to start with you. I know you mentioned that you do stories on the community, and I know you've done a play last year about some of Harrisburg's Black history, and then this year you came out with a play about an iconic Black business that is on North 6th Street. It was the famed Jackson Rooming House. Could you tell us a little bit about working on that play, and what did you learn about Harrisburg's Black Wall Street during that time, and how did the rooming house play a part in it?
So I started this journey, I would say years and years, probably over 15 years ago, as a living history interpreter with a group called the Pennsylvania Past Players. And that's where I met Mr. Caleb Jackson Jr. First, and some of the great history detectives like Linwood Sloan and a lot of historians that were unearthing a lot of buried stories and history of our community. And so it started for me with learning about the 8th Ward, which is adjacent to the 7th Ward, where we kind of look at as the Black Wall Street proper. But the 8th Ward was earlier in the early 1900s, and it was pretty much demolished by 1915 or so. But it was a very vibrant community of and diverse of business owners, homeowners, doctors, lawyers, basically for the Black community, a self-contained, sustaining community where what you needed, you can get right there and get it well. From a pharmacist to the mortuary to the schools, the teachers, the music, the artists. This area produced Esther Popel Shaw, who went on to be in the Harlem Renaissance, and so many more. But uh, under expanding the capital, that community, all, over 300 businesses, homeowners, um, families were displaced. They were moved, and the Capitol grounds were extended, and all of that history was buried. So for the past 4 or 5 years, we've been telling those stories of the famous business people, intellectuals, religious leaders, activists, abolitionists, all of that lived there. This year, and that was through the Voices of the Eighth series. This year, I had always wanted to know more about this Jackson House, and it really was because I saw a mural painted on the side of this building. So I would go past and like, what is this, and who are those people? So that mural inspired me to start to research and investigate and find out who were the figures on the building. And through that and engagement with Caleb, it just started to just be inspired to tell this story that many people in this area don't know. And when you say the Jackson House, people think about hamburgers. They think about the Jackson House restaurant and sandwiches. And I'm like, no, there's a building next to it. So just wanting to understand, communicate, and connect with our community about the personas portrayed on that building started this. And I ended up um, partnering with Clark Nicholson from Gamut and writing this piece called The Jackson Rooming House, Music's Resting Place. Because in my research, I found out that the Jackson Rooming House, owned by German and Betty Jackson, and German came here from Virginia. And, by the time he was in his late 20s, he had this, real estate and rooming house empire. He owned multiple locations in Harrisburg and up to Atlantic City. And in his place, he saw there was a need for Black travelers, for Black performers to have a place to stay, because in the era of segregation, performers were coming to this area, um, like Louis Armstrong, Cab Calloway, um, and they didn't have a place to stay. They couldn't stay in the places they were contracted to perform in. So as an entrepreneur, German found a way to fill that gap, built a very successful business on this. And from the late 1920s through the early 60s, he operated this place, the Jackson Rooming House. And the burger restaurant, the burger joint, the sandwich place was actually a legacy that he passed on. He gave that establishment to the current family that owns that. So, I was just like, I was in awe that a Black man passed on legacy to a white family. And we didn't really, that's not well known. So this is a play in which we explore that history and the people who stayed there, but also it's a journey on the evolution of Black music from blues through soul, and understanding that Harrisburg was a destination. This wasn't a place that people just happened to just go through, pass by. Harrisburg, this community, Black Wall Street, was a keystone of the Keystone State. And people came here very intentionally. And I thought that was empowering to know that Harrisburg is not just you know, a pass through, but intentional destination, because these Black entrepreneurs and families and community leaders made it happen in this area.
And I want to go back to you saying how Harrisburg was this destination. Can you talk a little bit about how has Harrisburg changed since the height of that era?
Harrisburg is during the era and of the Jackson House. So from the late 20s and in its heyday, I will say it was through the early 50s, mid 50s. Um, there were so many other rooming houses, in we call right where Jackson House is, that block on 6th Street, Jackson Square. So you had Jackson House, Mr. Caleb's family owned Jack's Hotels, Jack's Barbershop. There was beauty salons. There were clothiers. It was just vibrant. And again, going back to this notion of a very self-contained community of businesses and entrepreneurs, but also activists, and a whole community vested in succeeding and providing. German Jackson, his philosophy, he was worked at the Penn Harris Hotel during the day, was everything that they have in that space and the white hotels and the white, I want in our space. I want excellence. And it was a whole community of business owners that were focused on excellence. So fast forward to um, now, before the revival of this area, there was, to me, a sense of disconnectedness. And I think this is all the paradigm of uh, dismantling Black Wall Street. You demolish, then people get disconnected, and then there's a disappearance, an erasure. And when you don't know your history, you don't know the facts, you don't know the brilliance and resilience of the people that you came from and that were here before you, then there's the erasure. Um, and now I do see that there is a revival. There is restoration, but I want to, I'm excited when I know that there are Black business owners in the current space that we are referring to as Black Wall Street. And, and addressing and acknowledge that there are systems in place, and it's hard for uh, Black businesses and the Black community um, to survive in that, because there's so many, it's just so layered of disparities and inequities and obstacles that the Black owners, and we'll talk about this later, I'm sure, but I love the heart right now that I'm seeing, and that our community is saying and reclaiming, and also researching and uncovering the history, because when we know it, we're empowered by it. And also we can lay claim to the legacy that is owed and that's due to us. And then there's restoration in the beautiful buildings and architecture, but also restoration in terms of healing within our community, um, and reclaiming. So the resilience I'm seeing, and I love to see the resilience of the people like Demi, who is just fighting, and others to establish businesses themselves and encourage all of us that are in this together.
And you touched on it a few times about researching and finding the history on this era. I was wondering, could you talk to about your backgrounding on the Jackson House? Because I know when I wrote my story about your show, you said it was really hard to find documentation for it. And so I was wondering if you could tell the audience kind of what you went through to learn about this story and then be able to tell it.
I thought that I was going to, in the research phase, be overwhelmed and overloaded with information about the Jackson House because I heard the name so much. I was completely shocked when I realized that there wasn't a lot out there about the Jackson House itself. So, um, I the historic Harrisburg had done some research and memorialized it in an exhibit. So I was able to find out, get some information from them about other rooming houses that existed at that time. I went to the Green Book and was able to find mention of some of the places that were, the beauty salons or barbershops, some of the rooming houses that were, along the 6th and 7th Streets, um, and Bose Corridor, which, as we look at and talk about Black Wall Street, that's kind of where I was focused on. And, um, but most of my stories and information came from talking to people, which, we have to seek out the elders, seek out the people who live those experiences, record them, memorialize them, honor them. Um, and Mr. Jackson was instrumental in providing a lot of the information. And, his grandmother, a lot of people, little Walter and Sister Rosetta Tharpe, came through and they stayed at his grandmother's house. And he talks about seeing the first record voice recorder from little Walter. These people stayed in the communities, these performers and activists and artists, they stayed in the community. So I got most of the stories from talking, and also in this experience, I I subscribe to a lot of newspaper archiving services, and through this process, I found every now and again a poster that Cab Calloway was coming, or um, a performer was going to be Billie Holiday, may be in town, but it was just a little advertisement. And I'm like, why can't I find out more? So I learned from this, you have to consider the source. This was not, our stories weren't important to the mainstream media of the time. And so things weren't going to be recorded. But when I started looking at the Black newspaper archives, and so the closest here would, like the Baltimore Sun, or out of Pittsburgh. Then I started being able to get more information, but it wasn't available like locally through the Harrisburg Telegraph and the papers that were here. My interpretation is our stories, and they just weren't that important if it didn't involve some type of sensation or criminal activity.
Well, I will be pivoting to Jabari now. Thank you for the historical background on all that, Sharia. Jabari, could you talk from an economic perspective on how has creating or owning your own business changed in Pennsylvania in the past 50 years?
Sure. I will say that the biggest thing that has been a big change in it has been the necessary capital that you need to start a business has kind of changed. In the past, especially when you had really connected systems, like when you're talking about like having a Black Wall Street or having even like a Main Street where you have kind of a network of community entrepreneurship. Sometimes a lot of new entrepreneurs will kind of borrow into that system to start new businesses. And historically, we would see this a lot of times with a lot of historic Black churches that would provide even lending and startup capital for people that wanted to start a business that would provide a product or service that the community needed. And theoretically, you had the community supporting that business, so the business was going to be successful and then be able to repay back whatever that financing is. We've seen some of those informal connections that help people in raising startup money, especially in the Black community, disappear. Unfortunately, as part of like the point you said earlier when you talked about the separation that's happened in a lot of these communities, a lot of those networks are not as close knit, they're not as close together, and they're not as well resourced. So we haven't had the same kind of capital structures that really help somebody today that says, "Hey, I want to start a clothing store in my community." The ability for the community to sometimes be there and support that business with the startup expenses just aren't there. Also, I'll say that the other biggest thing that's associated with that is that the costs of starting a business have skyrocketed, and a lot of that is it comes from regulation from government, right? In the past, you had one or two forms that you had to fill out, and you were good. Now, 50 years later, now you have a array of licenses and permits and three different tax accounts, and there's all sorts of other rules and policies that govern every type of business. I know in Philadelphia we did a report. I believe this was in 2021. There was a report done that showed that there were 85 pages of code that regulated a coffee shop. Right. So the average small business, Black and brown coffee shop owns a community most likely starts with a framework that they're operating not in compliant with that code, because most startup coffee shops don't have the financial resources to hire a consultant or a lawyer from the jump, pay that person 75, 85, $100 an hour to navigate that code, right? We're kind of just, we're going to wing it for the most part. And what you see in these communities. And unfortunately, that ends up seeing a lot of businesses who will start, and they will start with the wrong foundation. And eventually, as they grow, they get in trouble because there's some sort of regulatory thing that they didn't imagine, and then they have to shut down or they get fined or things of that nature. So those are kind of the biggest kind of trends that I would see that have kind of changed over the last 50 years.
And I want to get Demetra's perspective on owning a business, because I know the Small Business Administration says in recent years, the U.S. has added Black-owned businesses at the fastest pace in 30 years, but Black ownership is still disproportionately low. Demetra, you opened your business in 2012. Can you tell us about your experience opening a small business in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania? And are there any points that Jabari brought up that you can relate to or that you went through?
Yes, I can. Thank you for sharing that, Jabari. I didn't have funding. I didn't know where to find funding. I just had strong faith and knew I wanted to start this business. And I didn't have a business plan, did not know how to write a business plan. So for most, you would maybe consider me unprepared or maybe even a risk, because if I needed to go get, capital, those are things that needed to be in place structurally in order for a bank to allow me to have funding in order to open this business. So my business was built off of just my savings, a wish and a prayer, and I just opened. So once I got in, it was then what? Now I'm here. How am I going to get the people in? And so my experience about opening the business, I didn't know how I was going to get people through the doors and in order to sustain the business. Because once I opened, it was fun getting it together and having a grand opening and, making a big deal. But then after that, it was, what do I do next to sustain this business? And I think for myself, I kind of told myself I'll just do this for a year. Let me see if I can get through this for a year. And so a lot of it was just using, my personal funding. Could I afford that? But I adopted really quickly to the use of social media through Facebook in order to help me. I did not have a website. Um, it was hard to get the word out. We started with an email blast and utilizing, just really um, when I look back at the graphics that we used then, but I knew branding was important, I knew marketing was important, but I did not know how to reach everyone. So I kind of had to do that through email communication, and then we transitioned into social media, which started with Facebook, and then I opened in April of 2012, which happened to be around the same time that Instagram released their platform to Android users. So they had like 1 million people sign up like very quickly during that time. And I did a post and I saw how that garnered the pictures that we promoted is what drove the traffic in. So I could get the capital that I needed to sustain the business. So I was a really early adopter of social media. I still love to utilize social media in a unique and creative way to drive traffic. We set trends. We did it with clever posts, music, and we had to do it in a way that was very different than what is available today. So we had to find unique ways to, create the vibe, so to speak, of what this store was. And, what is Urban Snob? For me, my business was like I call myself a refined hood girl, but I grew up in an urban setting, but I had very particular tastes. And I think that there's, a culture of people that think that, if you're in the inner city that, there isn't excellence. And as, Sharia spoke to before, excellence was a thread throughout my experience and opening a small business, and was very important in making sure that we set this tone and the standard for what you were going to get when you walked into Urban Snob.
And can you touch on what level of support did you receive from the community in the city?
Um, I received a lot of support from the city. I partnered with Madonna Awatri. She was really instrumental, and I call her the connector. She was, really plugged in, and I was more of a behind the scenes person. I wasn't social, so um, kind of partnering with her to kind of help get the messaging out. She knew which who was who, what parties to go to, where we should be. And so we kind of really positioned ourselves throughout the course of Urban Snob to make sure that we were relevant, that we were current. The community definitely showed up because it was unique. It was something different. We made sure that we opened up our community doors to not just be a boutique. Like, we made sure that we had events. We had it was a community hub. We opened it up to have real conversations. We gave back. As a business owner, I really feel that it's important to enrich the community in which you serve. And so right away I set the tone for that. I made sure I had give backs, and so that also allowed my brand to kind of show a richness to the city of Harrisburg, and they were very helpful for me, especially when I wanted to do in my 5-year anniversary. I wanted to do something big and major in Midtown that wasn't done before, and we, myself, Madonna Awatri, Candace Coleman, we put on a snob fest, is what we called it. And how can you, in a snob fest, that's big. This is not just a party, this is a huge festival. So I needed to have buy-in from a few stakeholders: my landlord, I needed my neighbors' participation, I need other business owners, because what I was trying to do was going to affect the community around us, but in a good way. And I wanted to make sure that we were able to pull that off. So I did have to tap in with the city of Harrisburg to make sure that we had some resources to make sure that we were safe. The police knew what we were doing. They were supportive. They showed up. And so I think it was, important for me to be in decency and order in every step of the way in order to, and because I set the tone for the first 5 years and I was consistent in that way, the city showed up for Urban Snob and for this community in a way that they also invited me to participate through a partnership with other outdoor events where Urban Snob became the curator for VIP events. And when we had national recording artists come into Harrisburg City, Urban Snob set the tone for what that feel would look like for our guests and our key leaders. So we wanted to have something, I call it snobby, but really on a level of excellence. And so we partnered with the city of Harrisburg, Harrisburg Housing Authority, with Oche Bridgeford to create like a curated event for the community of Harrisburg. And so I think I can say that this community has definitely supported Urban Snob, but also, we set the tone for what we were giving to the community. So we got that back.
And this is not a question, but one of our attendees, Rachel, said her snobs are here supporting you today. Just want to let you know that.
Rachel's a big snob supporter. I appreciate her help through the process. And Rachel is an attorney that, was another resource that we were able to tap into throughout our time at Urban Snob. We really set the standard of excellence that people that are in this community are of high excellence, and they had a space to go to as well.
And a Penn State study found Pennsylvania's Black-owned business growth was greatest between 2019 and 2020 when it rose by 23.1%. I wanted to ask Jabari this question, but Demetra, feel free to chime in if you want to speak on your experience. What is the situation like on the ground now, 4 years after the start of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Sure. Yeah, we saw that trend across the Commonwealth. It was really one of the things that came out from remote work and the expansion of pandemic unemployment assistance. So a lot of people who have never really had the time to invest into that business or that dream that they always wanted to consider, finally found themselves in a predicament where they now had more time on their hands. They were either home and working from home and able to dedicate some extra time towards that business idea, or also in some cases, some people have been either laid off from their job or lost hours, but luckily the government was providing a level of assistance where people were able to still meet their basic needs. So they were able to spend some time being able to start businesses. What we've seen across the state, unfortunately, as the following 2020 as post COVID-19, is a lot of those businesses unfortunately haven't really made it. You have had some businesses that have been very successful that created out of the pandemic that are now full-time situations for their owners, and you've seen the trend that really determined a lot of their successes has been kind of the utilization of technology and being able to really be able to ramp up with customers on social media and develop really compelling kind of transitional products. So, people that were like doing things where they were selling masks theoretically, like during the pandemic, that might have been a very lucrative business for those 2 years. But obviously in 2024, the custom design mask businesses aren't around and they're not making any money anymore. The other thing that's kind of affected the shift of those businesses as the pandemic aid drew back, and people then said, hey, I got to go back to work because I got to figure out how to feed my family and meet these financial obligations. And then also now you're having this super big push now to get employers are trying to get their employees to come back physically into the office. I know that's a big thing in Philadelphia because we have a lot of vacant office space. And so as that happens too, the time for a lot of those extra businesses is simply not going to be there. But what I will say, though, there were a couple silver linings that came as a result of the pandemic that has been really helpful to existing businesses, which I really have liked to see. And one of those things was we had a lot of aid programs that came out for businesses. Cities did aid programs. The federal government had aid programs. Organizations like ours developed grant programs to keep businesses afloat. And when businesses went through the process of applying for a lot of those programs, they realized, and it forced them to kind of address some of the deficiencies in their business when it comes to whether they were incorporated the right way, whether they had business bank accounts, whether they kept insurance, whether they had been properly filing tax returns and all these other things. And because of the time period, it gave people time to be able to work on some of those issues without necessarily being a huge punitive push on them. Because normally, in a regular tax year, if you submit a grant to the city of whether it's Harrisburg or Philadelphia, and you haven't paid taxes in 3 years, you're going to have some immediate repercussions that are going to be very negative for you. But because it was the pandemic and they're like, we're trying to keep businesses afloat, not necessarily punish people, there was a huge focus on letting people know, like, hey, you're not going to be able to be eligible for this, but these are X, Y, and Z steps that you really need to take. And business owners seeing the incentive of the next grant program that I might be eligible for, took the opportunity to do those things. So it made a lot of our existing businesses that some of them may have been, really thriving pre-pandemic, to really sit down and say, hey, let me make sure my paperwork is right. Let me make sure, I'm operating in a way so that I can be eligible for these things. And it ultimately made them very stronger business people because of it.
And are there grants or funding available specifically for Black businesses in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, so there's like the big program that there's one in Pennsylvania. It ended February 23rd, but it is in the next budget. So theoretically, if Governor Shapiro is able to get it passed, it's called the Pennsylvania Historically Disadvantaged Business Grant. And it is a grant that is typically between $10,000 and $25,000 for historically disadvantaged businesses that were around during COVID and are still kind of suffering to get back on their feet. And that's it's a statewide program that actually it puts priority on people that are on Main Street commercial corridors in cities. It also has a priority for cities that have been negatively impacted by gun violence, and making sure that they use some of those dollars to support that. And then there are also a couple other state related programs, although that program is specifically for Black and brown businesses, the historically disadvantaged program. But there are a couple other programs that the state offers statewide. They can be a little cumbersome. That's one of the things I always tell our entrepreneurs to say, look, if you're not, meeting with us, or if you're living in another part of the city where you have another district rep, you should talk to them or maintain good relationships with your elected officials, because things come out all the time. And you want to make sure that when that narrow window comes out, when a grant is available, that, your lawmakers or us or somebody else is going to make sure that you have access to that opportunity. I know that there's one other grant that we've been working with a couple businesses to get this, currently being offered under the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, and it is a grant that provides a 50% reimbursement on energy efficient equipment, and it's a really big deal, and it doesn't get a lot of press because a lot of times when you talk to Black-owned businesses about energy efficiency and climate change, they're like, that sounds really expensive. What does that mean? I don't know. But really, like when you scrap some of the jargon terms from it, it's like trying to figure out ways that are going to reduce your monthly energy bill by getting more efficient equipment. Whether that's an HVAC unit, maybe you have an HVAC unit or air conditioning unit in your business that is leaking and is costing you money because every drop of water that comes off of that air conditioner means a higher bill for you. Whether that's a heating system for your business, whether if you are a restaurant or something and you need a walk-in refrigerator or a range, this program will provide you up to $9,500 or 50% of whatever you spend. And ultimately, whatever that new piece of equipment is also reducing your utility bill, your heat bill, or whatever. So it's a really great program that people take a look at. And I know it's on the Department of Environmental Protection's website.
And Demetra, I wanted to see if you had any thing to add or wanted to say about how the pandemic affected your business at all.
Yeah, the pandemic, I wasn't prepared. So I was utilizing social media for people to come in the doors, but I wasn't prepared to do e-commerce at that time. So when the pandemic happened and everyone, was at home, how could I get my product out to my customers, and with it, did they need these things at that time? And so I started to change what I purchased. So I kind of did like more, cool loungewear, or and I also, because people were home, so they wanted to be cute at home. And then I made sure that I took that time to really pivot and get a website. I had an accountant, and I was told you cannot access, there's no funding for you. So there wasn't a lot of information about how the pandemic money could get to a business like me, because, did I qualify? Did I not qualify? There were so many unanswered, questions there. And then I was able to partner, or I was approached by Carl Singleton with the PA Diversity Council at the time, who connected me to Orrstown Bank, who was committed to making sure Black businesses had access to funding. And so, because that was there was such a huge disconnect. Like, these other businesses that were multi-million-dollar agencies, they were taken care of, and then small minority businesses, we had nothing, and we didn't know even where to go for that. So, I'm thankful for those opportunities, to be able to shift my business, make sure I had a proper website, make sure that, I was able to now, ship properly to my customer base that, I've had at that time, for quite some time. So I can say that's how the pandemic, it helped me shift. It was a good thing, because then it also just kind of gave me, once we got over to the pandemic hump, now I had two ways to kind of access my clients because of it. So
Well, thank you for that perspective. And I kind of want to get to wrapping up so we can get to some questions. But I know I want to get back to Sharia and ask you about the imperative for you in preserving history like the Jackson House, and does it have a role in shaping the present or the future? Oh, I think you're muted.
There you go. So, yeah, thank you, Jabari and Demi, for sharing all of this. It's really good absorbing and hearing this, and an imperative for me, and knowing our history is how important it is from an educational standpoint. Um, when you know the history, and in order to know it, you have to intentionally go back and seek it. And I don't think that is given enough value in our culture today. And our community, everything is immediate. It's so fast. Um, excuse me. Google it or AI it, Bing it, and you just trust what comes back. The disconnect is when we're looking at African American history, you don't get much back. And then it tends to be what you do get back from those searches isn't accurate. So the imperative is we need to make sure that our history is it's collected, it's curated by us, and that our stories are not only recorded but digitized so that there is wider access to our history, our stories. And history goes beyond the greats that we hear about, and we typically hear about them in February, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass. Like, no, German Jackson, um, because there's legacy there. And when we make it accessible and relatable in a community where you live, where you work, it's empowering. So and so this also costs money, and it takes resources, and it's all interconnected. Businesses thrive. We can have a resurgence, a revival of Black Wall Streets, which are more than like a geographical locale. It's a mindset of um, establishing, respecting, and helping thrive businesses that are owned by Blacks and other people of color and minority groups. But we've got to invest in preserving our history so that it's to me just as important as um, putting that business plan together. Um, if you know where you've been and you bring that into your presence, then you can move forward with purpose and power. And so that's my imperative, is that we've got to take the time, be intentional to do it, and resource our history being documented and digitized.
And to end that note, before we get into the questions, this is for all of the panelists, so feel free to jump in. But what, in your opinion, needs to happen for Black Wall Streets like Harrisburg's to rise again?
I'll take that. When I thought about this question, for me, it's collaborative economics, like, making sure that we're collaborative and we have the ability to work with each other. I think that it's important for us to make sure that we're providing the referrals, we're making the connections, we're telling others about the different businesses that we have. And I really believe that it's about building relationships. We see this in other cities. They work, they can have the same business side by side and they're supporting each other. And, I feel like if we build that community to be, stronger, if we don't take care of us, who will? We need to gather, talk, fellowship, mentor each other, and just be open to learn. I think that is a way that we can um, help strengthen Black businesses and especially the Black businesses in Harrisburg, to rise again. But it has to be a collective effort.
I agreed. That was kind of top of my list as well, like community and collective effort and shared learning. I love that in our community, in our area, they recently established like business incubators. So people have they have a space to come together and support, and also kind of accelerate new businesses and support the entrepreneurs. The resources and things like, you look down a list and you need a business plan, because when you go for a loan or you go to talk to someone at the city or the county, they're like, what's your business plan? And that can be intimidating. If okay, what is a good business plan? Because I have one, but there's a disconnect in what you want or what someone, a funder or resourcer is going to look at. So providing the opportunities to get the business owners support in developing all of those, financial literacy, because it's not historically, traditionally provided in our communities, so that entrepreneurs and business owners can be educated about the financial management, and then it's ongoing. So it's one thing to start a business, but how do we make our businesses sustainable and financially viable, and that they're not just surviving, that they're thriving? So I think it's a key part of it, and supporting, supporting one another, and realizing that small businesses, I will not be able to, and I do not expect to pay the same thing I would pay at a big box store for goods or service that I'm getting from a small business. And that's okay, because there is another business proposition or value that they're bringing and that I'm getting from going to this. So it's like a mindset shift that we as a community have to have, that because I'm dealing small doesn't mean that I'm getting cheap, or that I have to, it should get things at a discounted price. No, it's really inverted because we don't have the same resources and access to things that larger, more established, non-Black businesses have.
I would add to that, and definitely I agree with what both of you just said when it comes to cooperation and again those kind of support networks. I'll say as like someone who represents a very vast district, I have 14 commercial corridors in West Philadelphia under my administration. Two of them are like very historic Black commercial corridors. I have the 52nd Street commercial corridor, and I have the Woodland Avenue commercial corridor, which is also known as Africatown because it's such a population of African and Caribbean immigrants. One of the largest challenges that we have, even though we have a lot of businesses that are operate, like a lot of Black entrepreneurs that operate businesses, has been a commitment to ownership. We need to restore the ability of some of those Black entrepreneurs, especially ones that have capacity, to actually own the commercial spaces that are in their communities. Because when you have ownership, you get to be the person that controls who comes in your community and who doesn't come in your community. You can control whether you're going to stay or if somebody else is going to come in. And unfortunately, in some of the districts that we have, you have a lot of Black ownership, you have a lot of Black business leadership, but you don't have really stable ownership. And what happens is a developer comes in or the property trends change in your neighborhood and your landlord ends up selling your property and then somebody tries to kick you out and put somebody else there. And you could have been like the best business that's been making the city vibrant and extremely profitable and successful. And then some external thing has just literally knocked you out of your own market. So one of the things I say to anybody that's trying to really do that is if you have the capacity, if you're a Black business owner listening to this, and you have the financial capacity to purchase and own your space, please do it because it's something that is going to be invaluable to you as you move forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that perspective. So we'll go ahead and get into the audience questions and feel free if any of you want to just answer it, go ahead. But we'll go with our first one that was submitted. Hannah W said, how can local neighborhood organizations like the Friends of Midtown, Harrisburg Young Professionals support small Black-owned businesses or help to revitalize the historic Black Wall Street?
I think inclusion, partnering with people like Elise Irvis, who has culture and and commerce, where the people that are committed to making sure that the resources are getting to the minority businesses. So maybe starting with like having those types of conversations just to see what's needed and just starting there, start the conversation. I think that's a great. I think it's great that those organizations want to help, but see what we need so you can be of a good partner for Black businesses in the Midtown area.
And to add to Demi, I'm a Black-owned business. My business is theater. I have a theater company, and we are a nonprofit, but we still need the same access to resources and funding, and we probably get maybe 10 cents on the dollar that is donated to other arts or theater companies. That's just how it is when you are a Black arts group, organization, business. But there are other ways to support too, such as serving on boards. Your organizations also can create advisory committees or groups, or donate your services. Many people have companies or own or work with, they have legal teams and legal resources. They have people that write grants or apply for applications. Those are services that your organizations can give in kind or donate or collaborate, partner with Black-owned businesses to help them and make them stronger and more sustainable.
And then our next question is from Eric E. He just wanted to be clear on like the boundary streets of where Black Wall Street is.
Oh, I'll say that when we talk about Black Wall Street, just in general, I look at it more of a spirit, a mindset, an approach than um, actual physical boundaries. You know, Black Wall Street is a term used to refer to Black businesses that were thriving, um, that were doing, that historically um, they were in significant neighborhoods and they were self-sufficient. So I've been trying to find, and I think Dave's on this if he's still on, but from what I've been able to determine, it would have physically kind of been in the area we call the capital area, but kind of like from north to Barster Street, and what we look at now is like 8th and 7th Ward. But if you look at where the Capitol grounds are and all of the buildings there, labor and industry on over, that's where I think of when I think of a physical. If I have to like map it out, it would be there. But really, it was about the mindset that the Black community was self-sustaining and a community of like-minded individuals, business owners, homeowners, churches, and so it's kind of what I think of when I think of Black and try to define Black Wall Street in Harrisburg. Some areas, some places across the country, it is definitely more defined because it was an entire town or district.
And if I could add to that, I did not know that it was such significant history around Black Wall Street, not only in Harrisburg but in other places. For me, when we would go to Midtown, and many people would not think of diverse businesses in Midtown, there was just a small section of us that, when you looked from, I guess it would be, for me, the section was where maybe Her and Bose Street, in that little cluster of a area, the 1600 block of 3rd Street. All the businesses there, they were all minority owned. And so collectively, our um, neighborly group, we called ourselves Black Wall Street. And I think, when I was, so that was something that we were proud of. And, that's what we kind of like claim stake to in that particular area. So for us, it was that little section. You had Okishi's Hair Salon, who's been there for over 30 years. Um, we have the barbershop next, Gifted Hands Barbershop. They've been there, oh my God, maybe 20, 25 years. So there was just a cluster of minority businesses in this one section that um, we coined ourselves on Black Wall Street. So I was super excited for this panel so I can hear about the Harrisburg history of Black Wall Street. So I've been enlightened here too.
And then we also have David Morrison from the Historic Harrisburg Association in the chat. He's like sending resources about Black Wall Street and other things that the association does if anyone's wondering anything. But I know he mentioned that it largely ran from the Capitol Fountain to Maclay Street along 6th and 7th Streets. And our next question is from Jennifer. Oh, there it is. Jennifer H. She asked if there were any plans for a walking tour of the Harrisburg places and history. And I know David Morrison answered that as well in the chat. He mentioned that they have walking tours, and their next one will show the location of the old 8th Ward that Sharia mentioned, and those walking tours will be Saturday, April 13th and April Saturday, April 13th from 10 to noon. If you want more information about it, you can go to www.historicharrisburg.org. And then our next question is from Mark. He asked, where would you say Harrisburg's Black Wall Street is today or where it could be?
It's changing. In this section that, Urban Snob was in, rents are definitely going up. Properties have been sold, new owners are coming in and the rents are going, super high. For me, when I made the decision to leave the brick and mortar business, like a lot of businesses that are closing their retail doors, I thought it was important to make sure to transition the space to another Black owned business. So I held on and found the perfect transitional space. So then that way the community could thrive still with another Black owned business. So I'm excited to transition to Julia Mallory. She's opening a energetic well-being, like wellness space that I think that this community definitely needs. And so there is a new owner in the space that Urban Snob, once lived. And I think it's going to be a great addition to that community to keep the Black businesses thriving in that area.
And then we have one last question from a viewer. They asked, it's Kay. She says, is there a map of the area before the Capitol complex destroyed the area? And is there a list of specific Black businesses or specific businesses that operated during that time? I know, Sharia, I had a question if you could say where like there might be a green book.
Yeah,
Tool.
so there is the best resource, and it's amazing. I would say go to digitalharrisburg.com, and it has a lot of images, maps. It lists 100 of the prominent people that lived in the 8th Ward, so you can read their stories there. And a lot of researchers, Caleb was part of that research team, but it's an excellent resource there to get some of the before and after photos of the area.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jabari, Sharia, and Demetra. We really appreciate you giving us time out of your day to uh, speak to us about this historic part of Harrisburg. And thank you all to everyone who joined tonight. You can find a recording of tonight's event on our website by tomorrow evening at spotlightpa.org/events. So that's spotlightpa.org/events. And if we weren't able to get to your question, we're so sorry, but thank you for participating and have a great rest of your night.
Thank you.